Good morning, everyone. This is Session 1B, Implications to Retirement Planning. I'm Mary Stone. I'm the Retirement Staff Fellow at the Society of Actuaries. But I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenters this morning and our discussant. To my immediate right is Jesús-Adrián Alvarez, and he's a PhD candidate at the Institute of Public Health of the University of Southern Denmark. He's working under the supervision of James Opel. Jesús-Adrián studied actuarial mathematics and received his master's in population studies at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And during 2016 to 2017, he was the research fellow at the Max Planck Institute of Demographic Research, where he completed the research program, European Doctoral Study of Demography. In addition, Jesús-Adrián has a vast experience evaluating pension plans and in risk management since he spent several years in private companies such as Willis Towers Watson and AXA Insurance Company. To my far right is Subramanyan, and he is a DI Vice President with Prudential in Singapore. He heads the product modeling and product transformation activities in the pricing department. He has 30-plus years experience in the life insurance industry, value chain, including actuarial, new business and underwriting, and IT. He is an associate of the Chartered Insurance Institute of the UK. He's a fellow of the Insurance Institute of India and is pursuing to qualify as a full-fledged actuary. He has a passion for research in the field of insurance and has over 15 papers recognized and published in reputed international forums like the Conference of International Committee for Internal Medicine of 2019, the SOA's Living to 100 Symposium in both 2008 and 2011. He's the winner of the Shri Desiree Award from the Indian Institute of India for Research in 2005, 2008, and 2009. And he's the winner of the Sri Subramanyan Award from the Indian Institute of India for Research in 2003 and 2004. And in addition, he's an avid movie buff and likes to travel the world. And then finally, to my left, we have Sam Gutterman. Sam is retired from PricewaterhouseCoopers, where he had been a member of their actuarial and insurance management group. And during his time at PwC, he provided actuarial consulting services for insurance-related and government clients. And in addition, he participated in actuarial consulting and actuarial projects, and also assisted in insurance company audits. Sam has served as chairperson of several actuarial professional committees, as well as the past president of the Society of Actuaries. And Sam is currently a member of the SOA Committee on the Living to 100 Research Symposium, and is a member of the Aging and Retirement Strategic Research Steering Committee, and also the Mortality and Longevity Strategic Research Steering Committee. Just one last housekeeping item for those of you that want to get enrolled actuary credit. There are forms at the back of the room that you can fill out upon completion of the session and return them to get your EA credit. So we're going to start out with Jesús-Adrián. Thank you very much.
Hi. So I decided to take this microphone because I don't like to stand in one single place, so I like to move, right? So basically, we all know this, right? We all know that life expectancy at birth has been increasing over time and that we are living longer. And we have known this for a while now. So what? What are the implications of that? How does the outstanding rise in life expectancy affect us? Well, this increasing pattern in life expectancy have many implications for societies, but it also represents challenges for pension systems. Because basically, more and more people are surviving to retirement ages, but also individuals from more recent generations are spending more time in retirement than those from previous ones. This exacerbates inter-cohort inequality in the pension system and put pressure on national finances. Because basically governments and institutions involved in the payment of pensions have to pay more pensions during a longer period of time. So what to do about it? How can we solve this issue? Well, many countries like Denmark, the Netherlands, Estonia, and Finland have taken up the matter and have decided to change radically their pension systems. They have decided to modify retirement ages and link them to changes in life expectancy. In Denmark, for example, the current retirement age, the age that has been in force until now, is 65 years. But this will change, and it will gradually increase such that in 2022 it will be linked to a target retirement age, which I'm calling it here T. So the new retirement age in Denmark will be the age at which remaining life expectancy is 14.5 years. So the new retirement age is the age that solves this equation. So this means that it is expected that all individuals in Denmark spend similar average times in retirement, regardless of their sex, regardless of their socioeconomic background, and regardless of the year in which they retire. So with this indexation rule, what we are doing is to shift from a retirement age that is based on the years already lived to a retirement age that is based on the expected years to be spent in retirement. So life expectancy will be constant after retirement, constant at 14.5 years. But why 14.5 years? To be honest, I don't know. Only politicians know about it, but this number is already in the law. This number is already in the Danish pension reform. So it is expected that in the long run, this indexation rule will alleviate the burden of increased longevity. However, we don't really know what are the implications of this rule. We don't know, first of all, how fast this target retirement age has been increasing over time. We don't know how this indexation rule affects the cost of pensions for the different socioeconomic groups, because not all individuals in a population experience the same life expectancy, and not all individuals in a population experience the same uncertainty about dying. And to show you that, I have here the distribution of lifespans for Danish females for the lowest socioeconomic group and for the highest socioeconomic group in blue. And we can see that there are differences between two distributions, right? One is more shifted to the right and the other one is more picked up. And this was for 1985, but if we advance in time, we kind of observe a convergence between two distributions. Such that in 2016, there was 83% of overlapping between these two distributions. But still, we observe differences among them. One is more shifted and more peaked, and the other one is more age dispersed. So these differences in the distributions of lifespans by socioeconomic groups result into different outcomes of summary measures. Summary measures like life expectancy, of course, and lifespan inequality. Lifespan inequality measures the dispersion in the ages at death, measures how different are the ages at death in a population. And lifespan inequality is a neglected dimension of longevity that is very important in the definition of retirement ages. Why? Because it is strongly connected to longevity risk. Because it has been shown that in a context of low interest rates, high lifespan inequality means that life annuities are highly sensitive to fluctuations in mortality. So in Denmark, currently, as in many other European countries, interest rates are at their lowest levels. So this means that life annuities in these countries are highly sensitive to fluctuations in mortality. So by linking retirement age to life expectancy, this could, on one hand, reduce the exposure to macro longevity risk because we will have constant life expectancies after retirement, but at the same time, linking retirement age to life expectancy could increase lifespan inequality, increasing the exposure to micro longevity risk. And this could be magnified for those socioeconomic groups with higher lifespan inequality. So with all this in mind, in this study, what we did is to measure the implications of linking retirement age to life expectancy. And specifically, we used Denmark to show these implications. So we measured the demographic inequalities after retirement and their influence in the financial cost of pensions. Here I'm talking about life annuities, no? And across socioeconomic groups and how they translate to they compare to the total population. So we compare two demographic settings after retirement, the one that arise after the current retirement age, the retirement age that is in force now, that is fixed to a certain age, versus the target retirement age, which is the one that I talk about, that is linked to life expectancy. And we compare both settings retrospectively by using high-quality data from Danish registers from 1985 to 2016. And we subdivided all the population into socioeconomic groups by using a newly developed affluence index, which is based on individuals' income and wealth. So what we did is assign every individual in Denmark to a specific socioeconomic group based on their income and based on their wealth. And we allowed them to move between socioeconomic groups. But at age 67, we locked them down. So this means that they were not allowed to move anymore. For post-retirement ages, they will remain in the same socioeconomic group. Then we took all the population and we subdivide them into 5 equally sized groups or quintiles over time. So we did the same thing for every single year. Then we described the demographic panorama after retirement, of course, by looking at life expectancy for the different socioeconomic groups and for the total population. And we also measure lifespan inequality. So there are many measures out there of lifespan inequality. We can take the standard deviation of the distribution of lifespans, the coefficient of variation. We can take the Gini coefficient. But we decided to use the entropy because the entropy, first of all, tells us how different are lifespans in a population, but it is also defined as the elasticity of life expectancy due to changes in the force of mortality. So it's the derivative of life expectancy with respect to the force of mortality. So the higher the entropy, the higher the inequality in a population, but also the higher the sensitivity of life expectancy to changes in mortality. So for example, if we have an entropy of 0.4, then a uniform reduction of 1% in the force of mortality at all ages above X will result into an increase of 0.4% in life expectancy. So with these two summary measures, we describe what is happening in demographic terms, but then we translated this into the financial cost of pensions, so in terms of life annuities. So we compute life annuities at these two retirement ages by socioeconomic groups with different interest rates, and then we calculated the associated entropies. So similar to the demographic entropy, at a given interest rate delta, this life annuity entropy shows or measures the elasticity of a life annuity due to changes in the force of mortality. So it is very easy to show that when delta is equal to 0, then life annuity factor equals life expectancy, and this actuarial entropy equals the demographic entropy. So now let's take a look at the demographic panorama after retirement when we don't have interest rates, the pure demographic stuff. So here I'm showing 3 different figures, the 2 retirement ages I was talking about, and the resulting life expectancies and entropies. Let's first focus on the current retirement age that is portrayed here by the yellow lines here. So we can see that this age was fixed at age 67 from the period from 1985 to 2005. It was fixed, but then the Danish government decided to change it, and they fixed it at age 65. So this is for the total population, for everyone in Denmark. Then the resulting life expectancy, we can see that there's an increasing pattern, right? Of course, there's a big jump here, but this is mainly because retirement age was decreased. But in general, life expectancy was increasing over this period. When we look at the entropy, we can see that the entropy was going down during the same period of observation. So this means that at the current retirement age, the inequality in lifespans reduced, right? So now let's take a look at the target retirement age, and we can see that it has been increasing over time. In 2016, it was around 71 years. So this is the age that the Danish government is aiming for, the one that is linked to life expectancy. So by definition, we will have a life expectancy that is constant at 14.5 years over time here. So if we just look at life expectancy, we could think, okay, maybe this indexation rule is working, right? Because the increasing pattern of life expectancy at the current retirement age is offset because we always have constant life expectancies. However, if we look at the entropy, if we see the whole picture, we can see two things. So the entropy calculated at the target retirement age is much higher, but it also decreases to a lesser extent. So this means that by linking retirement age to life expectancy, we are implying a higher inequality in lifespans. And this is for the total population. But now let's take a look about socioeconomic groups. What is happening when we subdivide the population? So here we have life expectancy by socioeconomic groups calculated at the current retirement age and at the target retirement age. And the first thing that we observe is that the patterns that I show you for the total population replicate for the different socioeconomic groups. The patterns over time. So life expectancy is increasing at the current retirement age, and it's somewhat flat at the current retirement age. However, we observe differences, right? We observe differences between females and males, and we observe differences between socioeconomic groups. So higher socioeconomic groups here are described by darker lines, and lower socioeconomic groups are shown in brighter lines. So we can see, first of all, that females are always in advantage with respect to males because they show higher life expectancies, but also higher socioeconomic groups have an advantage over lower socioeconomic groups because they show higher life expectancies at both retirement ages. We can observe here a convergence between the first and the second groups. For females, the convergence is also observed somehow for males, but it is not very clear. So this is for life expectancy, but for the entropy we have similar patterns. We have that females have an advantage over males, and that higher socioeconomic groups have an advantage over lower socioeconomic groups because they show lower lifespan inequality. So with these two perspectives, with life expectancy and the entropy, we describe what is happening in terms of the demographic panorama after retirement. But then we translated this into the financial cost of pensions. So let's take a look at the actuarial perspective on these socioeconomic differences when we imply interest rates different than zero. And what I have here is life annuity values and associated entropies calculated at the target retirement age. And here we have when delta is equal to zero, when we don't have interest rates, so the demographic scenario that I show you, and when we have an interest rate of 5% that prevails during the whole period of observation. And what we observe is that when we increase interest rates, of course the life annuity factor decreases, but also the entropy. So the sensitivity to lifespan inequality diminishes, right? So interest rates are very important in decreasing this effect of lifespan inequality. These are values for the total population in the first column. But if we take a look at the second and the third column, here I'm showing the relative differences by socioeconomic groups with respect to the total population. And what we observe is that when we increase delta, then the socioeconomic gap in life annuity factors decreases and shrinks and converges towards the total population. But an opposite effect happens with the entropy. When we increase delta, then the socioeconomic differences in this measure become wider. So I was very puzzled when I saw this. So I developed a decomposition method to understand what is happening, to decompose the differences over time in the entropy, and I don't have time to show it, but it's already in the paper, so you can read it there. But I just want you to believe me that these differences, this enlargement in the gap, is mainly due to the absolute dispersions of lifespans, because the entropy is a relative measure of variability, because it's divided by life expectancy. But when we take into account the increasing pattern of life expectancy in the absolute dispersions of lifespans, we obtain an answer for this pattern. But I mean, this is not the core story of the paper. So, to sum up, what we found here is that by linking retirement age to life expectancy, the exposure of pensions to macro longevity risk is reduced because life expectancy remains constant after retirement. But on the other hand, we also observe that the exposure to micro longevity risk is higher because lifespan inequality increases with life annuities becoming more sensitive to changes in mortality. Currently in Denmark, as I mentioned before, interest rates are at their lowest levels. So this means that lifespan inequality, the values that I show you in the pure demographic scenario, equal to micro-longevity risk, because the actuarial entropy equals the demographic entropy. So in Denmark, previously, pension wealth was converted into life annuities backup with low financial risk assets, so low interest rates. But this has changed. And now, such guarantees have been eliminated, allowing for investment of pension wealth in riskier financial assets, generating higher returns. So this is crucial to diminish the impact of lifespan inequality. However, even in this case, when we allow riskier financial riskier assets, even in this case, individuals will deal with uncertain pension payments at the target retirement age, either through higher micro-longevity risk or higher financial risk. So we also show that socioeconomic disparities in lifespans prevail regardless of the age at which individuals retire. We saw that the socioeconomic gap was always there. And specifically, males from lower socioeconomic groups are in disadvantage because they spend fewer years in retirement, pay higher pension cost per year of expected benefits, and are exposed to higher micro-longevity risk than the rest of the population. These disadvantages, these socioeconomic disadvantages are magnified when retirement age is linked to life expectancy. So what we found here is that linking retirement age to life expectancy has detrimental implications for lower socioeconomic groups, at least how it's done in Denmark. And here I was just talking about Denmark. But these issues are not restricted to this country, of course, because some other countries like Estonia, Finland, and Netherlands are also modifying retirement ages, and they are linked them to life expectancy. And these countries are also experiencing low interest rates. So it is very likely that the demographic imbalances that I will show you here also prevail in those countries. So what to do? So what we suggest is that retirement ages should be defined as a trade-off between constant life expectancies and low lifespan inequality. Perhaps not 14.5 years, but find another way to address these two important dimensions of longevity. Thank you.
I will go here. Good morning. The topic for my paper was especially into the study of pre-programmed genetic health risk and how it could possibly be used into retirement planning. And as part of this, we had touched even the role that family history plays into this particular area. And in talking about this, okay, this is about the contents. I'll be taking you through the synopsis, the summary of the paper, and a bit into how the DNA-based pre-programmed health risk plays a role into the human life, and the impact and potential for retirement planning that this provides, any regulatory impact and interventions that might be needed, and finally, any opportunities that we see, and finally, the conclusion. So these were the main topics that I want to touch as part of this one. So essentially coming to the synopsis, it is well known that human life expectancy and prognosis of health conditions is possible depending upon the genetic profile of the people. And coming to the developments in genetic research, it is now reasonably possible to use the pre-programmed health risk depending upon a person's DNA. It provides a fairly good idea with almost 100% or rather 100% accuracy in case of Huntington's disease, etc., and to a greater extent in colon cancer and other etiologies also. And it is possible to actually, like with reasonable accuracy, estimate how much one can live healthily and to how long one could possibly live through DNA study, through the means of genetic scores and disease association analysis, polygenic score analysis, and other methodologies. Family history also has a very significant role in this aspect. So, and finally, again, the framework or regulations. So essentially coming to the genetic, to the summary of the paper that we had prepared, genetic testing is a big market and it is actually growing, and it is expected to touch 4.6 billion by 2025. And it is actually growing at around 25% year on year in most economies, including the advanced ones like the US to the developing ones like the Southeast Asian countries. And like we started with, the genetic variants have been discovered, including the risk that they confer on various diseases. And research also shows that humans have this pre-programmed propensity to develop certain diseases based upon the DNA and the DNA mutations also, mainly due to innate carcinogenesis, including metastasis. And it is also possible to find out epigenetic markers, like it was spoken at great length in the very enlightening speech by Dr. Howard, essentially. For example, HP1 is a very well-known epigenetic marker for colon cancer, and it also provides means to control this. And it is the propensity for diseases that can be sort of predicted is not limited to colon cancer alone. And there are methodologies to find out for other cancers and other diseases as well. And evidence actually links aging to genetic and epigenetic alterations, again, which was dealt at length today. Of all the ways that methodologies available currently, epigenetics is the one that offers the most promise, especially due to the gene control that it addresses, the universality, essentially, the holistic approach that it takes, the inheritance that it actually addresses, and finally, it gives hope to the reversibility. With around 20,000 genes, we can theoretically address most old age issues. And therefore, it is actually like it provides a lot of hope, mainly. And epigenetic changes are dictated by the environmental stimuli as well as the nutrient availability to address the intracellular metabolite concentrations. Finally, the genetic tractable models can be used. So essentially, it provides a way to predict human life quality as well as the length of lifetime, actually. And again, this DNA methylation provides a method to address the all-cause mortality going ahead. Again, that was discussed in quite some length in Dr. Howard's speech today. Coming to the DNA-based pre-programmed health risk, the role of DNA, as we know, is much more than to address how we resemble our ancestors. Genes and their mutations are responsible for health and also in determining how long a person could live and the quality of life as well. And there are a range of heritable gene mutations that have been identified, something like cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, Huntington's, etc. But one thing we need to know and note is that gene mutations are not always like harmful. Some of them also confer additional benefits also. And finally, coming to the theories of aging, some of the ones that we know of is about the accumulation of damage over time, how the human body degenerates. The second is about programmed longevity. It is possible to enable the switching of genes etc. And the endocrine theory of aging is one, and the immunological theory of aging. Telomere lengths have been used to talk or to actually like predict human life longevity. And longevity genes like SIRT1 and 2 have been identified to predict human life length again. Stem cells, etc., and epigenetics again. Briefly, like genetics explains about 35% of lifespan conditions, and it is also a multifactorial process actually. So while 35% is inherited, the rest can be due to various other conditions such as the occupation or the hobbies or the size of the family, education, etc. Coming to genetic testing again, which this logically leads to, the main uses is to get an understanding of the current state of human disease mapping, etc., and also about disease prediction using a simple probabilistic framework. And it is also possible to use this to provide overview of the basic classes of genetic-based prediction models. And ideally, these predictive models can be used to modify and also identify and modify the posterior probabilities of traits mainly. So the main predictive models that we could use is something about the regression methods, and secondly, the Bayesian networks. So the main uses of the predictive models is about the prognosis of disease traits with genetic information, and these involve a lot of usage for clustering within machine learning. And it also needs a lot of computational power because of the sheer extent of the data that it needs to crunch to come out with meaningful conclusions mainly. In this area, there is a lot of usage for machine learning and artificial intelligence also. And coming to the analysis of individuals' DNA, like we need to identify that, okay, that was a typo actually. Many diseases are linked to multiple mutations, and it's actually like there is a lot of covariance involved, and it is not one gene that is actually responsible for any disease or any condition. It is action of multiple genes. Therefore, it becomes all the more difficult to definitely use this. And it is also identified through genetic research that all persons, irrespective of the geographic origin, about 99.5% are genetically identical. It is the rest that determines the differences. And even in twins, approximately 25 to 50% of morbidity and mortality differences are due to genetic variation. The main methods of DNA analysis that are actually used are the risk scores method, which is similar to the numerical underwriting methods that we use, quite similar, and gene-based multiple regression analysis as such. And coming to individual mortality, biological age is always more important than the chronological age, in which area epigenetics definitely plays a important role. And we can also use Kaplan-Meier survival curves to stratify the high and low risk groups according to the differences in the biological age. And another method that is used in this area to on DNA analysis is regarding Kriging actually, which is again a modified regression method. But one thing we need to note it, whether it is Kriging or whether it is Bayesian network or anything, it is improbable that one single method can address the requirement. It is always better to use a combination of methods that would be needed. Coming to the aspect of family history, like we know that we can reduce our risk of disease. Like we cannot change our family or the past, but we can definitely change our present, and we can reduce our risk of disease with healthy diet, not smoking, etc. And coming to the genetic makeup, The family history helps identify inherent risks because it is unique to everyone. It has its own predictive powers. And the effect of the relatives' health on our health, etc., is actually known. It can also be used to discriminate between persons. It can also emotionally affect persons. Some of the key red flags in family history that tends to increase risk of new diseases or acquiring new diseases are that it can occur at an early age. If a certain disease runs in the family, it is likely that it is not only more likely to affect us, it is also possible that it will, we are likely to incur that in advance compared to others. If it is in more than one close relative, that is a big red flag again. And they do not usually affect a certain gender. So the distinction or gender-based distinction of diseases due to DNA or the family history is definitely there. And certain combinations occur within a family. So breast and ovarian cancer or heart disease, diabetes, they tend to run in families, therefore. So some more red flags in the area of family history is if a family has one or more adverse or even positive features, it gives very important clues about our health. And people with family history or disease gain the most by making lifestyle changes and also undergoing screening tests, etc. Adopting a healthier lifestyle is something that can definitely help in the case of hereditary diseases, and it also helps to detect new diseases earlier and also help address them earlier. And there are various approaches to analyze the polygenic effect of family history, and it is possible to use this as a prediction tool as well. Depending upon the polygenic scores of the parents, it is possible to actually predict for the children. And we did a study at the National Cancer Center, Singapore, over 400 hereditary cancer susceptibility syndromes. We find that around 20 to 30% inheritance of cancer can actually be predicted using the family history. So this was the result of our study actually. And coming to the impact of family history, the cancer susceptibility syndrome, which we found out are like this: 2 or more relatives with the same type of cancer on the same side of the family. This actually aggravates the risk. Several generations, if they are affected, that gives a very good understanding of the seriousness of the risk that it gives for the future generations as well. Earlier age of cancer diagnosis. And next is about individuals with multiple primary cancers. Occurrence of cancers in one family which are known to be genetically related, such as breast and ovarian cancer, colon cancer, etc. And finally, the occurrence of non-malignant conditions and cancer in the same person or family. So this is the difference we found between the inherited cancers as well as the sporadic cancers in our study. And another thing that we found is Markov models. They give a good promise to identify the impact of family history on pricing as well as in identification. And coming to the potential for retirement planning, what we see is DNA testing can be a useful tool for retirement planning, essentially because some of the main questions one considers while planning for retirement is about the danger of outliving our savings and how much longer can I work, what will be the status of my health post 70, etc. So knowledge about this in advance will be helpful for retirement planning. And with advances in genetics and computing, there are tools that are now available for planning and especially financial planning. And considering hereditary, lifestyle, DNA testing, etc., would allow for predicting the future health and elder care cost. And these can be incorporated for the financial planning as such. So this also can be used to predict the cost that will be involved for long-term care insurance, disability insurance, and critical care insurance. Finally, the regulatory impact and interventions that might be needed. Like with new genetic testing becoming affordable and also widespread, the life and health insurance companies that need to monitor the emerging trends, the importance increases actually. Right now, the regulations are all like they tend to range from the extremes actually, with very little regulation to literally ban on that. So I think a middle ground has to be found. And opportunities for the society as such. Genetic testing can be used wisely to improve the standard of life, into pricing, and also for financial planning. Synergy can be generated between the various stakeholders. And as of now, the usage of genetic testing has started in various shapes across the companies, especially in the Southeast Asia. For example, HSBC, AIA, and Prudential, they use it as a value add after sales. Whereas in Mungthai Life Insurance in Thailand, it is actually used to price and also to give benefits in the future by way of higher bonuses or for reduction of premium, etc. And coming to again, this is a continuation of the earlier slide. The usage or the utility actually varies across diseases. It is not something that is like extremely uniform across. For something like endocrine neoplasia type 2, it is highly effective. And as it goes across Alzheimer's, etc., it actually has very little intervention that is effective as such. So I think there has to be a study to actually come at a detailed understanding of this. And in conclusion, much of the impact of DNA testing is in handling the uncertainty it brings. So it gives a sense of hope for the future and at least an understanding. Genomics and genetic testing and precision medicine will be like playing a very important role going ahead. And absolute change of human behavior vis-a-vis the results of a genetic test or medical advice, is it a universal fact? The evidence doesn't actually support this. I think there is only about 30% utility essentially on this. And access to genetic testing can improve patient care because of the targeted treatment, etc., that can be given. And also it can be used for better designing the insurance products, etc. And however, extra genetic factors play a much bigger role on human life and longevity more than genetics. And while there is no clear danger at this point, I think this is an area where I think there has to be some detailed study going ahead so that we know how the industry is progressing. Finally, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be covering, as a discussant of these two papers, some brief overall comments, and I'll be looking at the general comments on both of the two papers. I'll be going in reverse order with the Subramanyan paper, the sources of health risks, and the Alvarez paper on inequality. Brief. At first, after I read these two papers, and I encourage you to do so, they don't particularly seem related. Although they have a general scope of retirement, they really look at it from a very, very different perspective, and also give you some viewpoints about whether or not you're looking at it from an individual standpoint or from a societal policymaker standpoint. But both deal with the implications of differences among people in terms of whether or not their backgrounds and characteristics, their family histories, the risks that they face, and the outcomes that result from their actions as well as from their family history. But my conclusion from looking at these two papers is that there is no such thing as an average person. And so therefore you have to look at, to make proper decisions, whether it be an individual decision or from a society standpoint, that you have to look at either categories or individuals themselves. And both raise important issues that an actuary should consider, whether or not it's from their work and their practice or from an individual basis themselves. First, in reverse order, the Subramanyan paper, and he addresses what is important for retirement planning. And again, I say that, or suggest that one size does not fit all, and they never will. And you can't design a system or a plan design that you develop and that will satisfy everyone's needs. Particularly in terms of the mortality and morbidity risks, which are clearly the emphasis of these and the focus of these papers. I agree that the knowledge of personal risks is important for planning, but possibly more important in my perspective is what an individual can do about it. Some things you can't do anything about it because it's foreordained because of your genes, but other things you can, and I think that that's worthwhile focusing in on us as an individual. Savings should be a function of what a person has to start with, as well as environmental and subsequent human actions, both societal and personal lifestyles. But looking at it from a society standpoint, genetic makeup of a country's population does not change quickly. Maybe over time, but in fact, this is something that in general is a given, and that therefore you have to emphasize on terms of society other factors involved. The paper describes the potential for predictive analytics, big data, and artificial intelligence. I think that they do have a potential, and I think actuaries should be looking at these, but I have a couple of caveats. The data and resulting findings are only as good as the data quality and the data availability. So therefore, even though it's useful to look at these techniques and approaches, I think there's some limitations. Whether you look at Steve Horvath's study of 9 people in terms of small population problems, or in fact whether or not the data that you obtain are the best information that you have made available. One thing that wasn't mentioned is privacy concerns, which is always a difficulty in obtaining useful and relevant information. I do agree with several points made, and it, in fact, was emphasized in this morning's presentation and in addition to the paper, that biological age is more important than chronological age. But on the other hand, but for retirement policy planning, only the latter is available. Luckily, Steve Horvath this morning said that there's a high correlation. I don't think it's maybe as high as one might expect because individual circumstances are so different. But a distinction of what can be changed and what cannot be changed is useful to assess. Things such as family history, educational attainment once a person has reached their 20s, predisposition to certain select diseases, and as pointed out, they are relatively select. Genetic knowledge can be important, but they can also be concerned, depending on the application, possibly anti-selection involved, particularly if you're a financial institution. Which bottom line leads me to the belief that sound laws and regulations are necessary to utilize genetic tests in the real world. One quote that really struck me in the paper was that people who were given DNA-based information concerning their disease risks made little or no changes to their health behaviors. I hope that this doesn't really happen, but in a majority of cases it in fact does. So therefore, even if you gain such information on an individual basis, you don't do too much with it. Hopefully that's because good, healthy lifestyles should be practiced, whatever the information is, and it'll benefit everyone. But in certain circumstances, you wish that people would act more in their own self-interest. My last comment is that on the paper itself is it needs further editing and review before it is actually published in the Symposium papers. But one note, just a distinction that I make between causes of health risk. I split it into 3 categories: 1, genetic; 2, environmental; and 3, personal behavior. Genetic is obviously, as pointed out, is evidenced by family history or genes, though certainly relevant. I think that the paper may have exaggerated its importance, but that was because that was the focus of the paper, and hints at other sources of effects, but doesn't go into those, obviously. Other genes may only have a predisposition to a condition. They aren't necessarily a given. And in addition, as pointed out earlier this morning and in the paper, is that usually more than one single gene is involved. And I know when about 20 years ago, when the genes were really investigated, I think that we've found out that the basis for life is really that simple, and that so many genes are involved in the most significant diseases that they will be a continuing challenge for decades ahead. Environmental is not just the environment, but the total overall environment itself, which is in terms of the stresses of life, as well as the environment in terms of, like, say, climate change. Then last of all, personal behavior, which is obvious. Individuals can only lever their own future history through personal action. Moving to the Alvarez paper, I think overall it was a very good, well-written paper. It discusses ages associated with raising the retirement age. Obviously, as we can see around the world, and whichever continent you look at, this can be a huge political issue. And therefore, in terms of final resolution, you have to understand the current level of politics involved in a country. But I think that it is important to objectively address fairness between socioeconomic and socio-demographic groups. We can't ignore that. Can't just assume looking at the average age 65-year-old. You have to look at those people who are in less health or are being prone to more or different types of diseases or conditions. As is pointed out in an IA paper that came out in 2016 from the Population Issues Working Group, there is a need to address the treatment of those with lower income or who are disabled. You can't just assume that everyone is equally healthy at the time of retirement or even early retirement. An interesting focus on this discussion is on entropy distributions. And so therefore, again, you can't look at overall averages. An interest, since we're looking at the Danish mortality, and it has great high quality data indeed, is something that was included in the the inequality paper from the IAA. Is this study, and it just looks at the importance of educational attainment, which is obviously associated with the socioeconomic starting point of life. And the huge difference between the ranges of educational attainment. This study split it up into 4 quartiles. 4 quartiles, okay, I got that. Why did I say that? Anyway, the distinction is obvious between men and women, with the gap anywhere from 4 to 6 years of life expectancy at age 30. But inequality, I think, is an important topic, whether it be an inequality of opportunity or outcomes. Inequality is inevitable. It is inherent in when you start out, and it also in terms of outcomes. Actuaries typically estimate expected costs associated with ex ante or expectations of future longevity based on results. In other words, we see the results, we observe experience by category, and then have to make policy either decisions or input to decisions. We need to consider a wide range of risks and characteristics, and I emphasize stakeholders. I agree with the conclusion that financial planning needs to be conducted taking into account the individual condition rather than just averages. In some cases, you can group them into categories, individuals, because you can't make policy toward the individual, but individuals make their own retirement decisions. I agree that linking retirement age to life expectancy enhances intergenerational, or can enhance intergenerational equity, but unless modifications to the various plan designs occur intragenerational, so both socioeconomic and sociodemographic differences can have a detrimental effect, particularly on those at lower socioeconomic groups. So even though you design a program, you should consider the various segments, stakeholders, and users involved. But I want to emphasize that inequalities and heterogeneity will always exist, but these will change over time. Individuals, even though you're stuck with the family history, you can make some changes, and that's the emphasis that each individual, as actuaries or other individuals, can make decisions on their own. They should not ignore whatever information they can obtain in the meantime. But I'd like to emphasize that there's a need to understand why rather than just what. Thank you.
So we invite questions from audience members. If you could stand to the mic, please, and identify yourself and pose the question.
I'm Carl Pulzer, and I'm with the Center on Capital and Social Equity. And I was almost afraid to ask a question because looking at the dais, and I saw Jesus and Mary up there, and I didn't go to church yesterday because I was on a plane. But then when I saw NV and Sam, knowing there was a variety of backgrounds, I was my wrists are hedged, if I go up there. So anyhow, my question is, the talk I'm going to give in a next session has a lot to do with inequality. And in our social security system in the United States, we're having a similar issue. I was just wondering, did you look at, I think you're just looking at benefits. When you look at also cost benefit of what the people pay in, and when you compare low income to high income, like in the United States, that changes the calculation because we have a very regressive funding system for Social Security, which disadvantages lower income. What about Denmark? I just wondered did you look at that? Is there any more information on that? And just some thoughts on that, because I thought your paper was great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So, in this particular paper, we didn't look at the actual, balance between the contributions and stuff. In Denmark, so this pension reform is very controversial, no? And still there's many discussions. It was passed in 2007, and there's still many discussions about that. So they're also changing the way pension funds operate. Mainly, all of them are defined contribution funds. So in general, it's just like the individual that the one that assumes the risk and then the one that contributes. No, there's a very small portion of statutory pensions that, of course, in terms of replacement rates, play a big role for the lower socioeconomic groups and for those people that they don't have a high income. But in general, it's a defined contribution system. Yeah.
It's a little bit too high for me. Thank you very much. Two very interesting presentations, and I have a question to Mr. Alvarez. Basically, my question is the Danish reform, when they fix this life expectancy at 14.5 years. First of all, do they use future mortality improvements? Is it like the actual calendar life expectancy, actual, or you kind of, in addition, put some more uncertainty in this number? So it's my first question. And second question is, when you looked at the inequality by socioeconomic group, and you showed that the age is expected to go to 72, which is, I will say, quite a big jump. Did you ever consider how the probability of survival to this age changes by socioeconomic groups? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think both are very good questions. So first of all, about the 14.5 years. So it is very unclear why it was this number, and so according to the Danish politicians, they say that they made some kind of projections, and they say, okay, according to the future improvements in life expectancy at age 65, sorry. So in average, there will be a remaining number of years, which is around 15 and 14.5. So it is very, very unclear. But they took into account these mortality improvements. I don't know how, because it is not specifically stated in the reform. I read it. I don't know Danish, but I asked my colleague to read it. So I was looking at that. And about the probability of surviving, that is a very important topic, because actually we have another project looking at that, because I mean, like, not all the people survive to retirement ages, and there's also another part of inequality, right? And the thing with socioeconomic groups is that, so for example, here we divided by individuals' income and wealth, because we have very high quality information, and we took the wealth of the household, not only of the individual itself, no? So we categorized that. So we made like sensitivity analysis, and we locked them down at age 50, and in Denmark, from age 50 to age 65, the proportion of socioeconomic groups, of people in the socioeconomic groups, don't change that much. But of course, the probabilities are much lower for lower socioeconomic groups, no? Like around from surviving from age 50 to age 65, it's around 0.6, if I remember correctly, for males in lower socioeconomic group. For females in higher socioeconomic group is around 0.8 or almost 0.9. So there's like a big gap in these terms, and that's a very, very interesting topic. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Les Lohman. Sam emphasized the three characteristics, environmental and personal choice among them, the last two. And as I was listening to that, I was wondering about the fact that most people and their personal choices are fairly ignorant of what's going on in the environment. And the thought that came to me was about, as an example, glyphosate, otherwise known as Roundup and now Bayer product, that apparently is showing up in our water supplies. It's in all of our wheat and oat products. So people who are going to McDonald's are not only getting high calorie, low nutrition food, but they're also getting gut destroying antibiotics, actually, as I understand it, in the food. And I'm just wondering, does an observation such as was made tend to sort of put a large amount of the blame, if you will, on the individual for the individual choices, when in fact, there's a great degree of structural ignorance involved in the process? And maybe it's just something you can comment on. I'm not sure it's even a question, but thanks for your discussions.
Hi, my name is Christine Dunning. I work for the Office of the Chief Actuary in Canada. I have a question for Mr. Alvarez. So linking the retirement age to life expectancy seems to exclude the impact of health status for the people who are age 65 and above. I was just wondering, I just feel like part of the savings in pension will be shifted to other social programs such as pre-retirement disability or even support to low-income seniors who have been affected by that reform. I'd just like to know if this was considered in the reform, or if not, your views on how it would affect the statistics on poverty levels for seniors.
So I don't think it's considered specifically, right? There are many questions out there. As I mentioned, like this reform was passed, but I mean they passed it, and now they're still like dealing with many different things, no? So I don't think that specifically it was considered this dimensional, like the health status and stuff.
My name is Kirill Andreev, and my question is actually to the Sam. I don't understand why linking life expectancy helps with the intergenerational equity. Because a few months ago we did some studies on support ratios, decomposition. And it turns out that 80% is driven by the current age structures, this by people who are going to retire. Only a small amount is due to mortality improvements in future. So I think that linking life expectancy to the retirement age is simply to address some fiscal problems, not the intergenerational equity. But according to your conclusions, is that it will help, you know. So if you could clarify this point somehow.
The specific point that I was raising about intergenerational equity was with respect to the Danish system. Right. That if you adapt your system to changes in expected future mortality, then in fact you promote, as the paper was included, that in fact you treat those with respect to retirement more closely by generations. That's said, it depends on the particular system design that was made. In terms of that, only looks at one aspect, though. That is the retirement number of years to retirement. It doesn't consider, let's say, the number of years of healthy living during retirement. It doesn't consider the effect of pre-retirement issues associated with it. But with respect to the product plan design, it does consider the simple change in expected future mortality after age 60, whatever the age is. It does promote that. But I think that this is considering in any plan design on a social basis, or even product design from a private sector basis. I think that both intra-generational and intergenerational issues can be usefully evaluated, as the point was made in the paper.
Thank you.
Hi, Eric Pickett from Club Vita. I have a question for Mr. Alvarez as well. Building on your question, in fact, I'm interested not only in the strain on top-up benefits, but just the existence of top-up benefits in the Danish system. So clearly, introducing a flat pension age that applies to everyone in the society brings in inequalities from differences in life expectancies. I guess one way of dealing with this is to bring in top-up benefits for people in the most sort of difficult parts of society, such as, you know, top-up benefits for people in poor health, top-up benefits for people who are sort of from very poor backgrounds. So I guess I'm interested, I mean, if the only benefit in the Danish system is the flat state pension, then it's got large inequalities. But what else is there that means that this is a kind of, well, that we can judge the system on? You know, is it an equal system? That are there lots of top-up benefits, or are there none, and it's really bringing in a lot of inequality? Do you know?
So in terms of benefits, I mean, like in Denmark, like they are all, all Danish citizens and people living there are allowed to access to the healthcare system. No, that's by granted. No, so that kind of benefits prevail regardless. Like, you have to live there, and you have to be like, you have to have a visa, you have to have a residence permit or whatever. You have to be a citizen to access to that. No, so that's a very important difference. No, like the healthcare system is universal, right? So. And for example, like a way also to address like these kind of inequalities could be like, okay, linking retirement age, but like to the life expectancy for the lowest socioeconomic group, no? So in that way, we could kind of address these inequalities that are there, no? But in terms of benefits, I think that like healthcare, it's universal for everyone. So That's
a big
that's
leveler,
it.
I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to ask a question? So I've already asked one. But here's some topic for future research and it also, anyhow. So Denmark is a very equal country, and there's a Gini index that basically is a measure of inequality, income inequality. And the Viking countries that Bernie talks about a lot, they're the most equal. So the Gini index for measuring inequality and income for Denmark is about 60% better, in terms of equality than for the highest country is the United States.
Yeah.
We have the highest inequality among the developed countries. So the mortality difference between high and low is probably much smaller in Denmark for many reasons than in the U.S. When the U.S. we see, like at the bottom fifth, over 30 and 40 years, the lifespans haven't increased at all. In fact, since Social Security began for the bottom fifth, they haven't increased much. There's a large increase at the top, so the average increases, so that when they set a higher age for retirement in 1983 that's being implemented now, they're thinking about what to do maybe another 2 years, or also a system like Denmark's in the United States. So that might have a much more differential effect on the low income because there's a wider gap. Mm-hmm. So I think cross-country studies like that would be really helpful. You should do one. Because I could use
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, no, but I agree. I mean, so what I show for Denmark, I mean, of course there are inequalities, but probably in other countries there's more inequality, no? And I showed that, for example, the first and the second socioeconomic group, they show some sort of convergence, no? Because it's getting more and more equal, no? And I didn't mention it, but that's mainly due to smoking, because females were smoking more and after the Second War, and they were dying more, and well, anyway. But that's a behavior as attached to that, no? But yeah, Denmark is very equal in many countries, but still, there's disparities, there's heterogeneity, no? And I agree that comparing to other countries like the US and other European countries, like bigger countries, no? Because Denmark is very small. But France or, I don't know, Germany, we could see other different patterns that arise there. But yeah, I agree.
I was just going to say we'll take your question as the last one, Anna, and then if others.
Anna Rappaport, as an attendee at all 7 Living to 100s, and I've already identified that there are actually several of us here. First of all, I want to compliment you all on raising great issues, but one of the big challenges to me, or big values out of also Living to 100, are controversies that it helps to surface. I personally am extremely concerned, and earlier wrote a paper about the retirement age issues. So any suggestions that you have about moving this discussion forward would be really, really important, because I think it's a very vital issue. You've identified the inequality issue very well, but if you have any idea that how do we do a good job of getting, first of all, the issues described well, and then all of the pros and the cons on both sides of the issue in front of us, so that we can move this forward, because this issue's been on the table for a long time. That question. And I'd say the genetic testing is another really big controversial issue. And if you have suggestions, again, about how do we get the issues well described and the pros and cons on the table, so that we can use this as an effort to springboard forward motion on 2 very important issues. I said early this morning I was wondering if we were going to hear about controversial things, and I'm so happy we have.
Well, thank you all for attending. For those of you that are looking for the EA credit, be sure to fill out the form in the back. I think we could just close by, again, thanking the presenters and the discussant.